the thing that shocks people when they learn more about this business from the outside, and it certainly surprised myself and my partners, is just how many times an item can get touched before it gets to its final reuse destination.
What do you mean by that?
So there are layers and layers of buyers and sellers and brokers and shippers and graders, and there's a worldwide web of secondhand use that all want this sort of material. Like they're all interested in used clothing for one reason or another. Maybe they take big lots of the credential and they sift it out. Maybe they're only interested in one part. Some people like to attack the stuff that hasn't been touched before. Some people like to take the cheaper stuff that has been touched before. And so if you put your old shirt in a collection bin, that might get collected by somebody like us, who will maybe sell it into a company that sorts it out and sells it to a chain of thrift stores. That thrift store will put it on the rack. It might sit there for a few weeks, and then it'll get sold or not get sold. It doesn't get sold, it could come back to somebody like us, who will package it up again and send it to somebody else who likes to go through this stuff that have already been touched once, because they can get a better deal on that, because they know they can find certain things in there that other people don't find valuable for one reason or another. And then depending on what it's made out of, maybe it'll get turned into rags. Maybe it'll get sold into a different chain of thrift stores overseas, where we'll have another shot at reuse. So a lot of the misconception that people have is that everything is like quote unquote charity, and that somehow these things can magically move to where they're needed without any cost.
In the US, on average, each person produces around 100 pounds of textile waste per year. And more than 85% of that goes directly to landfill or incineration. Now, again, it's the fastest growing component of our municipal waste streams. In combination with organizations' zero waste goals and cities' net zero carbon emission targets, finding ways to address this issue is key to ensuring a more responsible industry, a circular economy, and a sustainable future. But inevitably, clothes have an end of life. There is a point where a garment is unwearable. Now, before you usually even gets there, of course, it ends its emotional lifespan, sentimental lifespan, as you will, for the consumer and for the wearer, not just the physical one. So how do clothes get taken back from consumers and directed to the next step? Whether that be the right recycling centers, secondhand stores, clothing exporters, or landfill if need be. Ensuring that the clothes are separated responsibly and directed to the right next life ensures less clothes are directly just dumped into landfill, are not polluting our municipal waste infrastructure, and of course, when possible, have an extended life, right, through recycling or reuse. Something that a lot of these organizations we interviewed do effectively. Recycling and textile management ensures clothes that can be recycled get recycled, ensure that clothes that can be reused get reused, reducing the amount of clothes and textiles that just go straight to a landfill. Alex Husted is the co-founder of Helpsy, a certified B corporation whose mission is to keep clothes out of landfill. Their unique business model offers a multi-pronged collection service offering, enabling the collection of textiles through donations, and responsibly sorts their clothing to extend their life, ensuring that those clothes go to the secondhand stores around the country and the world. For those that can't go to stores, Helpsy ensures that the textiles get to the right end-of-life solution outside of resale, whether it be recycling, downcycling. Helpsy makes donating and extending the garment's life easier for both consumers and municipalities alike. Again, an opportunity that we've seen a few times here on this podcast is looking at not just the consumer, not just the brand, but also looking at the citywide and the social structure that we exist in. In this conversation, we get to listen to an entrepreneur who's part of a really amazing team, address multiple problems through one solution and grow it and scale it in a way that is really impactful. Helpsy is a mission-led organization that really lives its values, ensuring that clothes aren't just viewed as trash. Alex, I really appreciate you for joining us today, and I'm really excited to dive into this and understand more about Helpsy as a business. You operate in a very unique space, and I'm excited to dive in. But for the listeners that are tuning in today, I'd love for you to give a little bit of context as to what Helpsy is and what exactly is this business model that you guys have cultivated together.
So Helpsy is a B Corp and a benefit corp, and our mission is to keep clothing out of the trash. We do this in a host of ways. The biggest and most impactful at this time and historically is just getting clothing from the general public. So we do that primarily through collection bins that are out in the world that you may see out in a shopping center or behind your church or outside of school. We also partner with towns, municipalities of all shapes and sizes to divert clothing from their waste stream directly, be that with special events that they hold, or collecting from their transfer stations, or in many cases collecting directly from people's homes. So we do on-demand home pickup in a lot of communities. And then on the other side, we also we're a for-profit business. We don't have volunteers. We don't have donors. So we have to make money to keep the business running, right? So we do that by selling the clothing into secondhand markets. And part of what we do is sell this clothing we collect, but we also have a growing portion of the business that sells sorted clothing primarily by brand to secondhand retailers directly. So supplying thrift stores, supplying a lot of home entrepreneurs that use secondhand clothing as a business, where they sell it on eBay or Mercari or Poshmark, that sort of thing. So we're kind of we're enabling this whole secondhand clothing world in every way.
Totally. I mean, donation bins have been around for a while. Thrift stores have been around for a while. What separates you from, let's say, like a Goodwill or any of these other sort of collection bins that I'll see around town?
So we are often accused of like taking money or taking work from Goodwill or the local thrift store or the local charity. This is just a common misconception that there's a scarcity of used clothing, and there's just really not.
Yeah.
And the fact is that we work with many of these charities, many of these nonprofits. We have hundreds of thrift stores that we work with, where we will buy from them the extra clothing that they get that they don't have the capacity to deal with, or we'll also buy things from thrift stores where they don't sell it in a certain amount of time. So just like Macy's or JCPenney or whatever store, or Nike, whatever, like they have to turn over their shelves, their racks so often. The thrift stores have to do the same thing. So most of them have some sort of like color tag system, something like that, where they get swapped. It changes from blue to green to yellow to orange, and then all the orange ones get swept out and they have to go somewhere because they didn't sell in month to months, whatever their cycle is.
Gotcha.
So where does all that stuff go? We help them.
Yeah.
We help them find homes for all that, so that they can have another chance to get reused. Hopefully, another chance after that.
Gotcha. There's so much to dig in there. Do you know the percentage, or can you speak to the percentage of clothes that you get from consumers? So those bins in the neighborhood that an average Joe like me would go and donate my old clothes to, versus the clothes that you get from retail partners like an established thrift store or a normal brand store or whatnot.
So direct from consumer is probably close to 90% for us at this point. It's still the vast majority of what we collect and what we sell, and most of that we collect is sold as what's called credential in the industry. That means that it hasn't been opened, hasn't been sorted, hasn't been picked through. So that gets sold by the tractor trailer load, typically, to folks that do the sorting and do the grading, it's called also. So they'll have a big warehouse where they'll buy a tractor trailer load of stuff at a time. They'll have big teams of people that go through it, and then they'll have different outlets to sell the stuff into secondhand markets around the country, around the world. And so for them, it's based on, depending on their business model, it could be based on summer things versus winter things, men's things versus women's things, high fashion, low fashion, all that kind of stuff.
How much do you sell to thrift stores in the United States or secondhand stores in the United States, North America, versus exporting the rest of your goods to developing economies, secondhand markets in Africa, South America, Asia, and the like?
So right now, most of our sales are domestic,
Mm-hmm.
upwards of 90%, I think, still.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to, as an environmentally focused business, we like to keep things as close to home as possible.
Mm.
And obviously, from a financial standpoint, that makes sense too. It's
Yeah.
easier to, truck something down the road most times than it is to ship it overseas. Although there are some very queer things about the cost of shipping versus the cost of sea freight.
Yeah.
But we like to keep it close to home. But the thing that shocks people when they learn more about this business from the outside, and it certainly surprised myself and my partners, is just how many times an item can get touched before it gets to its final reuse destination.
What do you mean by that?
So there are layers and layers of buyers and sellers and brokers and shippers and graders, and there's a worldwide web of secondhand use
Mm-hmm.
that all want this sort of material. Like they're all interested in used clothing for one reason or another. Maybe they take big lots of the credential and they sift it out. Maybe they're only interested in one part. Some people like to attack the stuff that hasn't been touched before. Some people like to take the cheaper stuff that has been touched before. And so if you put your old shirt in a collection bin, that might get collected by somebody like us who will maybe sell it into a company that sorts it out and sells it to a chain of thrift stores. That thrift store will put it on the rack. It might sit there for a few weeks and then it'll get sold or not get sold. It doesn't get sold. It could come back to somebody like us who will package it up again and send it to somebody else who likes to go through this stuff that have already been touched once because they can get a better deal on that, because they know they can find certain things in there that other people don't find valuable for one reason or another. And then depending on what it's made out of, maybe it'll get turned into rags. Maybe it'll get sold into a different chain of thrift stores overseas where we'll have another shot at reuse. So each one of these transactions is a financial transaction. Once the item gets collected, each one of these is a financial transaction. And I think a lot of the misconception that people have is that everything is like quote unquote charity, and that somehow these things can magically move to where they're needed without any cost. And it's just not true. Like nothing can move anywhere without any cost, right? There's a cost to everything. And so, we get folks, like I said earlier, who, are worried that we're competing with their local thrift store or their local charity or with the Goodwill because they like Goodwill. Or they know Goodwill. They have some experience there.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we're not working against those people. We're working with them.
Exactly.
And the whole system wouldn't really work if we didn't have, if there weren't people like us that were kind of being the glue and holding all these different pieces of the web.
That makes total sense. Yeah, it sounds like you are that interconnective tissue that allows for the secondhand or the extension of clothing's life post consumer use, which is integral, especially as we focus on the idea of circularity and extending products' life. Players like you and the work that you do will become ever more integral. So I'm curious, the idea again of like a sorter or donation bin has been around before Helpsy came about. What was the donation and then redistribution of those goods like before Helpsy came in, and how does Helpsy do it better than the rest of them?
Well, we didn't, like you said, we didn't invent this. We didn't start this. This reuse world had been going on for decades before we hit the scene. What we saw as our advantage and what enticed us to this industry initially was that, or one of the main things anyway, was that it was sort of totally old-fashioned still. All our research early on was people were still doing this like with pen and paper. It was all still very manual. Nobody had applied any sort of optimization or data analytics or anything to it. And this is something that myself and my two partners all had experience with, and we're I guess can't everyone listening can't see how many gray hairs I've got, but we are sort of still the younger generation of folks doing this in a lot of ways. And we were very interested in applying the science and the numbers to it. And we thought that could, that wouldn't only be an advantage in the business sense of, optimizing, being able to make more money, do it that way, but also everything we do to make the business more profitable means we're doing better for the environment as well, and doing better for our employees and our constituents as well. It's one of the things that we like best about this business that we're in is that it is it's not a zero-sum game of that most businesses seem to think it is when they talk about sustainability or circularity or the environment or social justice or anything. It's not that you have to give something up, or it's going to cost you to do better with your environmental footprint. It's for us. It's the better the business does financially means we're doing better for the environment. The better we're doing for the environment means the better we're doing for the communities, and it's all one big cycle that feeds each other, and it's all a very positive relationship. So I think that's quite unique, and I like that a lot.
Absolutely. I think that's something that I think is really cool about your business and other businesses that are in this series, is that they're built by design to be to there's a direct correlation between the positive impact they have on the environment and the operations of their business, instead of where a lot of established players are quite the opposite, actually. And so that's just a note to take on building business with intention, and creating a service that actually has a positive impact rather than just a negative one. Before we go too deep into the sort of the business and the mechanics of your operation and the environmental impact that it has, I'd love to understand a little bit of who Alex is, or what drives someone to get involved in the secondhand clothing space, and what was your background that led you up to this, you and your co-founders?
So we all we go back. We've been friends since we were in high school together, and we've known each other even longer than that. Having all sort of grown up together, our fathers all worked together in the same hospital growing up. So we have this weird connection that goes way back. And when we set out to go into business together, we were all kind of in a place in our careers where we were similar to, I think, how you described. You kind of were doing something, but you didn't really feel fulfilled. We were looking for our next move. And we all wanted to do something that was going to be, was going to be meaningful to the world, and something that we could be proud of. And so we initially started looking for small businesses to invest in that we could sort of bring into the 21st century and grow and consolidate, and looking at different industries. And we kind of just stumbled upon one of these clothing collection businesses. And the light bulb went off immediately for all three of us, where like, wow, like this is really cool. It's an unknown little niche business that none of us had ever heard of, and it's a profitable little business. It's great for the community. It's great for the environment. It kind of has unlimited growth potential because of how big this waste stream is, and it doesn't seem like anybody else is attacking it financially, analytically, anything like that. The players were mostly sort of people who had just sort of grown slowly over the years. Even the bigger ones, nobody was really investing in this industry the way people invest in other growing industries. And we really liked the way that looked and the way we thought it would make us feel, and so we dove in head first. And ended up looking at a bunch of these businesses that were for sale, the collection side of the business, and thinking that, like, we're going to negotiate with a bunch of these owners. Some will work out, some won't. We'll probably end up buying one of these, and we'll learn a little bit. We'll slowly grow it bigger and bigger. And what ended up happening is we reached deals with 3 of these businesses and bought them all at once, which was kind of biting off more than we had anticipated chewing.
That's crazy.
But we,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
our lawyer will tell you to this day that he's never seen anything quite like it in the M&A space, having done that for 40 something years. So, but we all survived.
Well, clearly, yeah.
And
strong.
We've added more businesses along the way in acquisitions, but we've also grown organically ourselves, and we've are always on the lookout for new ways to get connected in the space, and the new ways to keep all the different loops connected.
So, just to be clear, you bought 3 clothing sorters or
3
collection agencies?
Collection businesses, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they all did the same thing effectively, but what were they, just different regions, or are they competing the
Yeah,
same?
they're different regions. One was in New England, and that was initially as much books as clothing. Which is that could be like a story for a whole nother podcast, if you want to hear that story. But the short version is we don't collect books anymore. And so that business was very much based on relationships with direct relationships with nonprofits and schools and churches in particular, and that was sort of the relationships where they would connect. We bought a business in New York, right outside the city, and that was mostly relationships with small, like mom and pop local businesses, like people with a couple of gas stations or bodegas, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the New Jersey business had a whole different angle, where it was based in big shopping centers and working with town recycling centers. So each one had its own little niche, and we thought that was great, and still do, where we could take what's working here and apply it to some other region, and vice versa, and sort of start spreading best practices across our whole operation.
And so your role within the organization is specifically within operations, right, as a COO?
So I'm technically CIO, like information.
Okay.
And it's part operations, it's part managing like all these M&A opportunities that come up. It's part managing in the internal information flow, what people need to get their job done more effectively, more efficiently, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. So you and these 2 partners of yours, who were friends from childhood, decided to venture into acquiring a new business to leverage and grow. I mean, on a personal level, I'm just curious, why was that the motivation? Were you interested in just investing? Were you guys tired with your day jobs? Like, what motivates a couple of guys in their middle and mid-age to do something like
that? We had believe it or not, gone into business together before. We had a dot flop at the turn of the century, when that was sort of the thing to do. So our first business together didn't work out at all.
What was it for?
It was like a sort of a software startup, and it didn't end up going anywhere for a lot of reasons. But what did happen was we remained friends. And our relationship stayed strong despite that initial failure.
Sure.
Which I gather is pretty rare in those sorts of situations. Like when things don't go well, it's like a divorce. It's unlikely that people end on real amicable terms.
Mm-hmm.
But we did, and so our relationship, our friendship, having survived that first try gave us the confidence that we could try something together again, and not only do better this time, but continue the friendship along successfully as well. And so, um, you know, you have your ups and downs like you do in any job with anybody you work with. But at the end of the day, I'm working with my two best friends, and it's really hard to beat that. Not having them always have your back on the job and off the job, and understanding that we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. That's an impressive story and sort of feat to overcome, and I'm really happy for you all, the whole three of you, that you guys came out on top personally after. So did you guys just pool your money together to buy these things? Did you have external investors? How did you grow this business, and how did you get to profitability effectively in this space?
So we started with a bunch of our own money, and with the one business we bought using an SBA loan. Which, if folks don't know what that is, it's basically the government helps back loans from banks to reduce the risk to the bank. So it encourages the bank to lend to people who are, in some cases, less creditworthy, but a lot of times it's folks like us who have sort of a less well-known or unproven business model. So, this is one of the many things that I did over the course of the years, was dealing with all these banking relationships. So going to every bank in our community and beyond, and trying to explain what the industry is, what we're trying to do, the size of the opportunity, how it works, was tremendously difficult, because nobody's ever heard of the used clothing industry. Like, it's not something that people know or understand or see in the news. And the banks they're used to lending money to somebody opening, a small retail store or a pizza parlor, or power washing business or whatever. Like, there's things that they know and that they understand, and that's what they're comfortable with. And we weren't something that anybody knew or understood. So it took a long time to find a banking partner that could sort of make the leap of logic, or use a little imagination and say, "Oh, okay, I see what you guys are doing here. I see the opportunity. Let's go. We'd love to help you out."
Interesting. Just for context, what years are we talking about here?
So we started shopping around together in late 2015, and then ended up closing those three first acquisitions in the beginning of 2017. So it was about a year and a half from like inception of what we were trying to do to until we actually started like operating the business.
I see that, and I just think about the correlation on the rise of secondhand in general with things like Poshmark and Depop and all that stuff. And I mean, obviously, it's only grown since then, but even then, it was still a growing trend, let's say. So it's interesting and rather unfortunate that financial institutions didn't back the idea of, I guess, secondhand market. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, the secondhand has been growing and been getting more popular in the States. I think it's from what people I've talked to around the industry, around the world. I don't think it's ever been. How do I put this? I think it's always been more accepted in other parts of the world, or at least that's the way it seems from talking to folks. And in the United States, it's been sort of traditionally looked down upon. Like, who goes to the thrift store? You go there if you're poor, or you go there if you're a college student pinching pennies or something. But people don't, normal people don't go to thrift stores to buy clothing. Like, if you have the money, you buy new stuff, right? And that has changed a lot in the past, just in the past decade. And that's fantastic for our business, but it's also fantastic for for the environment and for
Totally.
society as a whole. I
Yeah.
think like getting people to understand that reuse is good. Like people
Yeah.
buy used cars, people buy used lots of things without really thinking about it. Clothing is a weird item in some ways because people have a lot of have emotional attachment to things, develop emotional attachments to it in ways that they don't with other things that they buy and sell.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that is fading as it becomes more mainstream. And putting it online did help that happen. I think did help sort of turn that corner in people's heads.
You mean buying secondhand?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. You're so exposed to how consumers approach the disposability of their clothes and whatnot. Is there something that you have learned over the years, or in fact, a fact in general, that you wish that consumers, the average citizens, would do more of when it came to reducing their environmental impact through their clothes or of their clothes? What advice would you have for an average citizen to reduce the environmental impact of their clothes?
Well, there's the R's that we learn or are taught. So reduce, reuse, recycle are in order. Like that, you want to reduce what you buy first, and then reuse what you can as much as possible, and then recycle what can't be reused.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same with clothing, and I think what doesn't get a lot of understanding is that there's value in everything, even in the stuff that's too torn to be used again, or it has some stains on it. Like there's still value in that. It's not trash because there's somebody who will buy that and use it for something else. It's still a raw material that has value.
Mm-hmm.
So at every point in the life cycle, we can squeeze a little value out of it. And so about half of what we sell, give or take, gets reused as its next step. And then about 25-30% is turned into is downcycled into things like rags, that sort of thing. And then there's right now what recycling is. That would be like a downcycling reuse. And then what recycling is the most of the remainder gets shredded up and turned into things like shoddy and the car insulation and stuffing for cushions and things like that. Where again, it's replacing virgin materials, so that's it's a positive.
It's a net positive for sure.
It's the only stuff that really gets tossed at the end of the day is things that are somehow contaminated, like oily rags or things that things that are for some health or sanitary reason are unreusable.
Gotcha.
Which is a very small percentage of things.
Yeah. Do you get approached by companies like a Renew Cell, like any of these fiber to fiber recycling or circular initiatives? I mean, and what's your take on that? And as someone who is a provider of secondhand clothes and textiles, what's your take on that whole sector in and of itself?
I'm glad you asked. We're actually involved in conversations with a lot of those folks, and have been since the beginning. And we're very interested in the recycling space because it's part of closing another one of these loops. And the fashion industry has gone from basically paying lip service to reuse and recycling up until very recently to starting to push for getting fiber to fiber recycling happening. Like that's what they want to latch onto for the most part, because it allows them to look good and feel good and still sell new clothing. And so you have businesses out there that are starting to make like air quotes commitments or promises to have a certain percentage of their clothing be made out of old clothing at a certain time in the not too distant future. And so this is kind of it's kind of chasing after what happened in other recycling industry, where like Pepsi and Coors and like the people making bottles and cans said, all right, we're gonna make the cans we want the cans to be made out of old cans. That's how we're gonna get people to notice recycling, and how we're gonna make our business have a little less impact and a little more greener sheen to it. So, they want to have the clothing manufacturers now want to be able to say things like it says on the Coke bottle, say like this bottle is made from 100% post-consumer plastic recycling, right? How do you have clothing do that? Well, it's trickier because it's not a homogeneous material. Like the aluminum can is pretty much just aluminum, right? And the plastic bottle is mostly just plastic. But clothing has become more and more complex over the years for a variety of reasons, where very few items these days are just one fabric. Most things are a blend of some sort or another. And so how do you separate those things out? So there's a lot of really smart people and a lot of big businesses and a lot of money starting to go into solving this problem, where if you have cotton, you can pull apart the cotton and respin it to some degree, and reuse it as cotton again. Wool's good for that too. But the petrochemical stuff, the polyesters and the nylons and these things, it's a different story, because you have to chemically break it down in order to make it fiber again. And what are the processes to do that? And so, folks are working on that. We love to see this happening, because it creates more value for the at the lowest end of the chain. And so the more we can create value in the chain, the more we can encourage the reuse and the recycling at the top of the chain.
Helpsy work, collects clothing from people, right? From people like you and me. You sell off to thrift stores, secondhand stores, and then sometimes recyclers and downcyclers and the like. Do you ever engage with brands? Do brands ever engage with you? Is there any communication between the actual brands and like a sorter and a collector and exporter like you?
We do, and this is something that's been growing. It's probably the part of our business that's been growing the most rapidly in the past year or so. When we started out, 7+ years ago, we pretty quickly tried to attack that, trying to get in directly with brands to make relationships and see what we can do to be a source for their unwanted stuff for whatever reason. And so while we did score some appointments with a couple of businesses at like their Manhattan headquarters or wherever, we basically ended up talking to the marketing department. And they wanted to make a good story. It was a marketing push. It wasn't actually about moving product and attacking the problem at all. And so that was very disheartening at the time, obviously, but that has changed over even just the past few years, where now people are really interested in attacking the problem. So we have a bunch of different things we do directly with brands. We have some that basically we handle their returns. So most things that you return, particularly online clothing sales, but even stuff, when you take it back to the store in your neighborhood, at the supermarket, or whatever, when things get returned, particularly for clothing here, that it costs them more to receive it, inspect it, repackage it, relabel it, reshelf it than it does to get a new one from Indonesia. And they don't have the facility to do all that work, because it's just, it's too costly, and there's not a return on sort of recertifying everything that comes back returned. So returns are a big financial problem for businesses, but they're also a material problem, where they start stacking up this stuff that they don't necessarily know what to do with. So we've started doing basically the service for a few businesses where the returns just come back to us. They're like, look, we don't have anything to do with it anyway. We'll send it back to you. And so some of them they just don't want to see it again. We just take it and do whatever we want with it. Some of
Mhm.
them want information on what comes back, like what people send, and they'll, pay us to inspect the things and give them back information.
Mhm.
And then some businesses, different people have different ideas of how to protect their brand identity,
Mhm.
say. And so, they'll say, okay, you can sell it, but we only want you to sell it overseas. You can't sell it here. Or you can't sell it overseas. You can only sell it here. Or you can sell it to brick and mortar stores, but we don't want to see it get sold online.
Wow.
Or you can only sell it in batches of, 10 items per person or whatever. So people have different ideas of how
Protect their brand image.
how they're gonna protect the image, which I don't really agree with that as a concept, but I understand that that's it is an entrenched concept, and we're not going to persuade people otherwise. And so we do well by being flexible and by being connected up with lots of different parts of this industry, so that we're able to fulfill all these like particular requests, these particular needs.
Mhm. Alex, the work, from my understanding of sorting, grading, distribution, things like that, it's a very manual task. It's very labor intensive. But how is this sort of clothing sorting and grading leveraging technology to better operationalize and get products out of landfills and just recirculated in any manner better than it is today?
So that's what I said earlier is, one of the interesting things about us getting into this business was applying technology to a whole industry that was totally immune to technology previously, it
Yeah.
seems like.
Yeah.
Um, the things that we sort ourselves, we do sort a little bit of the material ourselves from specific sources, and particularly through these brand relationships that we have.
Mhm.
And so we built a technology to help us sort things internally. And that's been extraordinarily helpful in building up our sort of like micro wholesale business that I explained earlier that we call Helpsy Stores. And so the technology we have is still hands-on, like it's not automated with robots and stuff. It's still people
Sure.
touching the clothing,
Sure.
but it's a brand-based system where people put the brand in, and depending on what the brand is, the system sort of leads them through a decision tree of sort of what sales bucket to put it into.
Yeah.
And certain high value things, it kind of doesn't matter what condition it is. People like it no matter what. If it's very low value brand, then there's other outlets for us to sell that stuff. If it's somewhere in the middle, it'll ask them more questions about whether there's stains or rips or there's damage or what kind of conditions and that sort of thing. And so we have this system that allows people with no fashion understanding or training to go through clothing very quickly and judge the best reuse channel for it, just using the software, not having to understand whether Madewell is better than Chanel or whatever, right? And the thing is, like, we know, like, some of these brands, like those, and everybody listening has heard of those too, right? But our system right now actively sorts things in around 25,000 different brands, but we've logged more than 250,000 at this point.
Wow.
So, which is, I think, still just a total drop in the bucket of the amount of clothing brands that are
That's
out there.
crazy. It's a crazy
So if you think
number.
about that, if you have a warehouse full of people that are like some of our customers do that are sorting clothing, a lot of value is getting lost because nobody can keep all that in their head. Nobody can keep up with new fashion brands. Nobody can keep up with the old ones, and nobody can understand all that intuitively because it's just impossible. And so how does that's one of the reasons why there's still value in stuff that thrift stores reject, is because who rejected that? Like, well, maybe the right customer didn't show up in that 30-day span to buy something, but it's also that the people in the back of the thrift store, never heard of this brand, but maybe it's just because it's nothing that sells at the mall. It sells at some fancy store that they've never been to or never would go to, right?
Yeah. I don't want to call it human error, but the human component of this and the subjectivity of all this,
Hmm.
especially branding, comes in, and it's like that's when you know. I mean, I would think for all of us who are interested in fashion and who have thrifted a bunch, you know, you'll find that Armani shirt for $5 at some Goodwill, and it's like, how did that get through the cracks or whatever, you know,
Yeah,
certain things
exactly.
like
And so
that. So
we're trying to reduce all that subjectivity
yeah, yeah,
in the way we sort and do the technology. And
that's
the other big technology piece that's coming along,
mhm,
that we're not inventing ourselves, but we're uh, trying to get involved with and help along through various channels, is
mhm,
the sorting of materials. So
mm,
you asked a little bit about the actual recycling, like the fiber to fiber stuff.
yeah,
So the part of the hurdle there is that, I believe I said a little earlier that the fabrics are often multi-component, like there'll be cotton polyester, or there'll be part rayon, part nylon, or whatever, right?
mhm,
And so how do you quickly and effectively take the I guess the subjectivity out of that as well? How do you scan those things and determine what recycling channel things can go into based on their fiber content?
mm,
So there's folks building technologies to be able to scan things for fiber content so that they can more effectively be recycled. Just like you know, the MRF uh, center will sort the paper from the plastic, from the aluminum, from the steel. You know, people have seen Toy Story 3. You know, it's that sort of thing.
totally, totally, totally,
But with clothing, so
yeah,
it's a tricky, but that's, you know, that's another tricky thing too. You apply technology to it, but you know, there's a learning curve, and it's a whole new
hmm
um, it's a whole new challenge for people doing machine vision projects like this.
hmm absolutely. To that point about challenges in your business, for everyone out there that's listening, I mean, sorting and distribution of secondhand clothes is one of those businesses that kind of gets overlooked and not talked about or, you know, engaged with on from like a consumer's perspective. What are some of the challenge? One of the biggest challenges facing your industry specifically?
Biggest challenges. Um, I think one of the biggest is I see it is sort of the same thing that's challenged every other reuse recycling industry in the beginning, is just understanding, like conquering apathy, like getting people to understand that, yes, like this is a big problem and there are easy things you can do to fix it yourself.
Mm,
So we have lots of relationships with municipalities, but it's often difficult to get those started because they don't think of clothing waste as being a big part of what gets thrown away. Even though the EPA has done the studies, and you know,
yeah.
we know that it's a large chunk of what gets thrown away, what ends up in the landfills, incinerators, and we also know that it is by far the fastest growing
hmm
waste stream,
hmm
faster than plastics, faster than e-waste, faster than anything. It
Totally.
blows them all away in how
Totally.
fast this pile of waste is piling
hmm
up. So what do we do to get people to understand that?
Mm,
And it's tricky because you know, people take the bag of garbage out from their kitchen every couple of days. Like they have an idea of like how much that is. They wheel the the bottles and cans to the curb every week, and you know, they kind of know how much that is. But you don't throw away clothing every day or every week. But it's in the U.S. anyway. It's more than 100 pounds a person a year what gets thrown away,
that's crazy.
and that adds up. You know,
Yeah.
that adds up a lot. That's more than close to 5 million pounds a year just in the little town that I live in.
Do you think that that number, this is coming from someone who buys a lot of secondhand clothes? I'm a very quote unquote intentional shopper. This might be a little bit off.
Excellent.
No, I am. I have definitely touched product that has gone through Helpsy's Helpsy's business model for sure.
Great.
But the that number of, like you said, 100 pounds of textile waste per person on average, right?
Yep.
That is an insane number to think about. Is that taking into consideration like textile waste from industry and then averaging that out also per person, or any context as to how that number came about?
This is consumer waste. So it
Okay.
also it'll include things that aren't like textiles that aren't clothing.
Yeah.
So like
Carpet.
sheets, towels, tablecloths, stuff like that. That's also fabric,
Mhm.
but it's not something you wear. At least not unless you're going to the toga party, right?
Yeah.
So that's all in there as well. But that's no less important or no less big of a problem
Totally.
than the
No,
clothing
absolutely.
than the clothing is.
Yeah,
It's all part of the same. It's all part of the same issue.
for sure. For sure. Alex, I have two more questions. We talked about how consumers can reduce their environmental impact through the consumption of clothes, and the 3 Rs and whatnot. But I want to understand the stakeholders that you engage with. Which are consumers, obviously, but then also thrift stores, secondhand shops in general. What can that component of the value chain do to reduce its environmental impact? Obviously, somebody similar to you, its business model is inherently, if it does well, it's also doing well for the environment because it's
Mm-hmm.
reducing waste, clothes clothes that go to landfill, extending the life, etc. But everyone has a part to play in this, and I'm curious to know your take, both personally or professionally, on how these secondhand shops what can they do to reduce the overall environmental impact?
So this is a place where they don't all know how the industry works either necessarily.
Hmm.
So uh, we partner up with lots of thrift stores, big and small, and we often run into ones who don't understand that. Like they could, if they know what sells, they can buy things that they want to sell from us. Like you can source,
Better.
you can source secondhand clothing from Helpsy, and people don't ever think of that. This is a sort of a trail that we're blazing, is being able to help people do that. So like people want to run a thrift store like a regular clothing store, ideally, right? If you had a supermarket and the truck showed up every day to supply the market and you didn't know what was going to be on the truck, was it going to be milk and eggs, or was it going to just be like a truck full of collard greens, right? How would you run a supermarket like that? This is how people run thrift stores now. Like they get a supply in and they don't know what it's going to be, and they have to go through and try to find some value in there. And successful thrift stores are very good at doing this, but they'd also love to get more stuff deliberately that they want to sell, that they know they can make a better margin on, or they know will draw more foot traffic in if they have a certain brand or a certain type of item, right? So I see that as a place that secondhand folks can improve. And also knowing that like the stuff that you don't sell still has value. And this is where we fit in as well on finding homes for things that have already been picked over, that have already been through the store once. There's a whole world of buyers and sellers for that, and just because it didn't sell at your store doesn't mean it's worthless or no good. There's still some value you can squeeze out of that. Not everybody throws stuff away.
Yeah.
But not everybody understands that there's options, like that there's a whole, they have some person who's been the guy with the chain of thrift stores in Kansas City, like, there's a guy he calls to take away the stuff. He doesn't know what happens to it. He just knows that it's taken care of and he doesn't have to pay to throw it in the trash. But he doesn't understand that there's a whole world of those people out there buying and selling that stuff that he's getting rid of. Like there's a whole nother side of the industry that they're, that's just one level down from where they are, but it's not a part of their daily worries, and they have somebody who fixes it, and that's great.
Gotcha. Alex, this has been a really fruitful conversation, and I'm really glad I learned a little bit more about Helpsy. But what does the future look like for you guys? What does success look like in the next 5 to 10 years for you and for Helpsy as an organization?
So we're boldly trying to raise the alarm on this issue, and trying to get the reuse and recycling of clothing accelerated as quickly as possible. And there's it's a lot of engagement. It's hard to engage with folks when they don't understand the problem or they're not aware of the problem, as we talked about. And so, there's going to be a lot of education that's involved as we build and grow the business, but there's going to have to also be a lot of investment in this problem as well. People understand climate change is a thing, right? And people get it that you invest in alternative energies like solar and wind, like that's going to help. Those are big things, right? You get an electric car or hybrid car instead of a gas guzzler, that's going to help. Like, there are these obvious things that are in the news all the time, in the social media feeds all the time. Eat less meat, all that sort of stuff, right? So all that happens, but we're like a teeny tiny little noise compared to all those big things. But it is a giant problem, textile waste, and it has an outsized environmental impact because of all of the fresh water and chemicals and pesticides and petrochemicals, all the stuff that goes into the production of clothing. Reducing the amount of original clothing made has a humongous a positive effect on the environment and helping curb climate change. And we want to get that out there, and we want people to know that all these decisions you make do have an impact. If you go shop at the thrift store instead of going to the mall, that has an impact, and it's a measurable impact. And it's not 5 gallons of water that are used to make that t-shirt. It's thousands and thousands of gallons that used to just make that one t-shirt, and all that adds up. And so getting people to make these little decisions in their lives to make a change, it can really make a big deal. And that's investing time and education, but investing money as well. Finally getting the industry itself, the fashion industry itself, to see that they're sort of digging their own grave in a lot of ways, and put money into solutions. So we have seen that start to happen as well, where there are a number of big businesses that are investing in fiber to fiber recycling, or investing in these sorting technologies and things like that. So they can sort of baby step into solutions that it, from, in some ways, it's it's just sort of furthering their existing business model. But I kind of believe that it's okay to do the right thing for the wrong reason if it still gets you to the end that you want, right? So they may not be doing it for the reason that we're doing it. They may not be trying to save the planet. They may just be trying to hold on to the bottom line. But if they're doing the right thing from the environmental perspective to get to that new bottom line, then that's great. More power to them.
Touche. Well, Alex, I appreciate your insights, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. I think it's super important and super interesting, and I only wish you guys the most success in the future. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you.